Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Did you know most wildfires happen in spring? It's because the grass and trees are so dry. Protect your home with what they call a defensible space. Remove spruce trees and tall grass within 15 feet. And move firewood 30 feet away. Clean out yucky rain gutters too. Doing this made our house up to 5 times more likely to survive a wildfire. That's good news for me and Max. Wildfires happen. Be ready. Brought to you by the Anchorage Fire Department.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is the 1st of May. Can you believe we've cruised through April now? And as you've been watching Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, you've probably discovered some interesting climate facts. Some of those from the National Weather Service in Anchorage today about just how warm the back half of April has been. We encourage you to stay up to date with our latest watches, warnings, and advisories, satellite and imagery, and radar imagery, current weather information, of course, climate statistics as well. You can do that anytime by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov will get you there as well. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find each Weather Service office in Alaska on Twitter, NWS Juneau, NWS Fairbanks, and NWS Anchorage. And of course, find us on Facebook under NWS Alaska and on YouTube. If you search for AKWX TV, Alaska Weather TV for short, you'll find this entire broadcast a little bit later on in the evening. So if you're out to sea for a little while or perhaps don't make it up from the boat in time, you can watch the entire Alaska Weather show that way. Or if you'd like to get a sneak peek of what we're going to talk about during the show, during the mid-afternoon, say about 3:45, 4 o'clock or so, you should be able to find on our NWS Anchorage channel on YouTube the mid-afternoon report. This goes through the surface maps that you're about to see. So kind of a sneak peek in the afternoon, and of course the full broadcast later on. Here's a look at our hazardous weather at this point. As we go into the evening hours, dry conditions and wind will create some dangerous fire conditions, mainly north of the Alaska Range into the Tanana Valley, from Fairbanks to Tanana and into the upper Kuskokwim Valley there. Red flag warnings are posted at this point, so make sure that you are being extra careful with fire, and obviously with conditions like that, burning right now is probably strongly discouraged in your area. If I were you, I would check with your local officials before starting that. Let's check on breakup now. Things are changing fairly quickly there, and the River Forecast Center is working at 110% right now. In the upper Tanana Valley, you can see some open and mostly open conditions there, including some parts of the upper Copper River Basin as well. Along the Kuskokwim, change is happening there quickly, and this map has been updated several times today. Along the Yukon, they're just starting to see some changes there up around Eagle, or hearing the folks there at the River Forecast Center talking with our Alaska River Watch group, including the Department of Homeland Security with Alaska and Emergency Management. And changes will surely start to shape up a little bit further north with the very warm weather that we've seen spreading from south to north in the last couple days. Fire danger, as we noted, is at least on the high side there north of the Alaska Range, and just seeing some changes there in the upper Kuskokwim Valley as well. Also around south central in the Matsu Valley, conditions are pretty dry. We haven't seen that very low humidity today, but conditions are right there on the edge. So again, be extra careful if you're doing any burning around south central. Here's a look at the Bering Sea satellite picture now, and before we start the loop, you can key your eye on a few of the swirls there. A broad area of low pressure in the upper atmosphere is driving the strong southerly flow across from the North Pacific through places like Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and all the way through the Bering Strait. And you can pretty much pick out that pattern now that we've got the clouds in motion. Several other areas of low pressure are starting up as they move off the coast of eastern Asia. And with that comes more Pacific moisture for the west coast, although the amount of precipitation seems to be fairly limited. Places like Nome today picked up about 1/10 of an inch, and we saw similar conditions around St. Paul, but everywhere across the west coast and all the way up toward the Chukchi Seacoast and even in the interior are fairly warm. 40s, 50s, and 60s, not uncommon for most areas. And even Barrow today was seeing some reports of rain during the afternoon with temperatures in the mid-30s. Across the mainland, you'll notice high pressure is fully in charge with a pretty much severe clear type situation from the upper Yukon all the way down toward Bethel, Bristol Bay, Kodiak, South Central, Prince William Sound, and Southeast. And the big winner of this weather pattern for the next few days will be southeast, it looks like, as conditions remain fairly dry for most areas there for about the next 5, 6, maybe even 7 days. And across the west, though, we're starting to see some changes with cooler air pooling across eastern parts of Russia, and it looks like a frontal boundary will start to make its way across the Bering Strait and toward the west coast as we head into Saturday and Sunday. With that comes northwesterly winds and probably some colder air making it as far south as the central and western parts of the Aleutians. Now, that process will take some time to switch up for most of the mainland, but it does look like a little bit of a change in the weather pattern that perhaps you've been enjoying for the last couple of weeks now. In fact, the back half of April again in South Central has been an unusually warm and mild one. Today's weather map shows the surface pressure there at surrounding the Yukon Valley at 1,037 millibars all the way into the upper Yukon, also across Bristol Bay. Now, invading that a little bit is a trough of low pressure, a little bit of a disruption in this main bubble of relatively stable air here. It's really not doing too much. It's allowing winds to move very lightly across Prince William Sound, the Cook Inlet, and then out into the Gulf, where you see some clouds, some of those low clouds across the central and western Gulf. Southeast, also looking at an offshore flow, probably going to be some stronger winds there in the next 24 hours, especially for the central inner waterways. So watch for some of those gusts, and some of those could reach upwards of 50 to 55 knots there. So some very strong gusts, not a sustained wind, but still, you don't want to be caught off guard by winds like that. And across the west, you can see warm air trying to make its way into the western Bering Sea. Really not going to have much of an impact as well. The stationary boundary that's separating the very mild air here from the much colder air isn't changing just yet. So tonight that boundary will include some opportunities for clouds and fog and maybe some scattered and relatively light precipitation. Some of that snow the farther north you go. Rain and snow around places like the St. Matthew Island waters, and then turning into rain as you get into the Pribilofs and down toward the Aleutians. High pressure is also sitting around Old Crow and east of Fort Yukon. At 1,037 millibars, it's not very strong, but it is enough to hold back most of that cold air from dropping into the Copper River Basin or the upper Yukon Valley. The pressure gradient's pretty tight here across southeast, so again, watching for some stronger wind gusts is certainly going to be important as we go ahead into Friday and probably Saturday as well. You can see some colder air is trying to work its way up into the higher terrain there, but it's going to have trouble sneaking its way over, so British Columbia will hold on to more of that. A frontal boundary is working its way into the central and eastern parts of the Gulf. It does not stand much of a chance of lifting any farther northward at this point, thanks to high pressure again sitting across the Yukon, so it's holding firm. That weak wave of low pressure you see from the west coast up around the Chukchi Sea all the way into South Central, also showing some signs of helping to change the weather pattern a little bit. Some of this has to do with the amount of heat we've been receiving, creating what we call a thermal low, where the heat starts to build the atmosphere upwards and creating more of a lower pressure at the surface there. As that happens, sometimes that's what helps to spark some thunderstorms during the afternoon during the summer. We're not quite there yet, but certainly this is a pattern that wouldn't be surprising to see a little bit later on in the year. The frontal boundary out across the Bering Strait all the way toward the western Aleutians, again trying to trap moisture nearby, and it does. That means a chance for some rain and snow showers north of the Bering Strait all the way southward. And by Saturday, here's the change that we've been talking about, a little bit of a colder push coming in across the Bering Strait, making it to the YK Delta, probably into the Brooks Range and the North Slope. At 1,015 millibars, the change will bring a west to northwesterly push of wind and probably colder temperatures, so that by Saturday, it wouldn't be surprising to see some colder air dropping into the central and western part of the chain and maybe reaching a little bit further close to Bristol Bay. Now, around the Alaska Range, don't be surprised to see a few showers develop later on in the day for Saturday, and maybe some of that reaching a little bit further eastward for Sunday. So changes are coming, but right now things look pretty mild and dry, and for southeast, dry conditions should prevail well into the weekend and probably past it. Now, if you're in southeast, you had a wonderful day. 67 degrees, the high temperature in places like Sitka and Juneau. Other areas around Talkeetna and Nenana also hit that 67-degree mark. Those are some of the hottest temperatures we saw in the state today. Upper 60s across southern parts of southeast. Hyder was 66, Haines and Skagway also fairly mild. 64 around Yakutat. Prince William Sound saw temperatures in the 50s and 60s. 62 in Anchorage. The high today, I believe, was about 63 degrees. That's what it was, 63 degrees. The record high was 68, so we didn't quite make that, but boy, it's pretty warm out there. 50s for most of the southern Kenai Peninsula around Seward and Homer. Kodiak Island, lower 50s as well. Talkeetna, 64. It looked like Fairbanks made it to 64 degrees late in the day. 62 in Eagle, 60 in Northway. Tanana was 62 degrees, again after warmer temperatures earlier in the day. 57 in Fort Yukon, low 40s for Anaktuvuk Pass and Arctic Village. The Arctic coast saw highs in the mid to upper 30s. Kaktovik, 37. Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse closing in on 40 degrees, mid-30s for Barrow, again after a little bit of rain earlier in the day. Kotzebue Sound temperatures in the 30s and 40s, 35 in Nome, 50 in Unalakleet, 41 around Nunivak Island, 34 in Savunga. McGrath was 64 degrees by 4 o'clock, and southwestern temperatures in the 50s and 60s. Iliamna was about 60 degrees, 40s for the Alaska Peninsula, Cold Bay and Sandpoint, right there in the mid-40s in fact. St. Paul and St. George closer to 40 degrees. And Shemya, bringing up the rear a little bit, about 38 degrees out there this afternoon. Lower temperatures in the mid to upper 30s. Some areas inland will probably hold on to temps in the low 40s tonight. South Central, upper 30s and lower 40s. Kodiak Island, 41. 30s and 40s for southeast. The interior, probably closer to 30 degrees. North of the Yukon, those temperatures will be a little bit closer to freezing. And for the North Slope, mid-20s should do the trick tonight. 37 in St. Paul and upper 30s to about 40 degrees for most of the chain, with McGrath looking at 43 degrees and Bethel about 35, with a high temperature there tomorrow with 57 degrees. Across the interior, highs tomorrow in Fairbanks could approach the 70-degree mark. My goodness, that's going to be warm. South Central, mid to upper 60s, low to mid 60s for places like Anchorage and the Mat-Su Valley, 54 in Kodiak. Upper 50s to low 60s for southeast. The heat keeps on coming for Juneau at 64 degrees. Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, you're looking at 47, 39 in St. Paul and St. George, 46 in Nome. And the North Slope likely above freezing, even if by a few degrees. In some places like Kotzebue Sound, we'll be looking at temperatures in the lower 40s. So enjoy what comes your way. Tomorrow's flying weather shows severe clear across most of the mainland. Southeast looking pretty good, except for some of the southern islands there. You might see a little more MVFR conditions thanks to the storm just a little bit further south of you. And across the Bering and north and west of the St. Matthew Island waters, expect a better chance for MVFR conditions, and you may find some of that a little bit farther north from the Arctic coast. MVFR conditions for the central and western chain. Your past conditions, and obviously looking at VFR conditions for Anaktuvuk and for Adigan Pass, and for all areas along the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill included. Rainy Pass, Windy Pass expected to be VFR all day long. Isabel Pass should be visual. And we would expect Mentasta and Tanita Pass to both be VFR throughout your Friday. Portage Pass, smooth sailing and great conditions there flying into and out of Prince William Sound. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions there. And wow, what a mess this is. Tomorrow's freezing levels shows the signs of change all the way across Alaska. The red lines, of course, are the freezing lines aloft. Those are as high as 8 to even 10,000 feet across the central and eastern parts of the Gulf. And across the North Slope, they stretch from about 4,000 feet to 8,000 feet south of the Brooks Range. Out across the west, changes there, but you'll notice that cold air is working its way eastward, dragging the surface freezing line back south just a little bit there and trying to nudge that warmth that's been spreading over all of Alaska a little bit further south as we go. Now across southeast, a pretty dramatic change in a small amount of area, anywhere from 2 to 10,000 feet there. That on top of a tight pressure gradient, you're probably looking at some gusty winds at times. So again, be careful out there. Here's a look at the icing potential. Not a whole lot over mainland Alaska or southeast. You'll notice out across the northern part of the Yukon and also across the Bering Strait and westward into the Gulf of Anadyr. There's a chance for some light rime, maybe isolated moderate, below 14,000 feet to about the freezing level. So if you're flying that far out, watch for a little bit of icing issues, but that's about it. Turbulence potential and the jet stream all tied in together. The fastest moving river of air is going to be probably west of Dutch Harbor in Alaska, Nikolsky, to west of the Bering Strait. Those winds going from about 90 to 110 knots. You can see the main storm quarter dropping southward quickly and then dropping southward again once it moves east of Alaska. So right now aloft we have a pretty strong protection system going with this bubble of high pressure. That's also dragging in a little bit more moisture from the Pacific, but it's got to work really hard to get up under that high pressure system. So right now that's feeding in those showers that we saw out across the Bering. and leaving little else to happen across most of southeast. A few storms, any storms that's hovering right here around the Pacific Northwest might kind of snake their way up there into the southern parts of southeast. But folks, that is it. It's a pretty stable weather pattern as we have seen. 9,000 feet, high pressure up across the upper Yukon Valley and the eastern Brooks Range, guiding in very light winds at 9,000 feet across the eastern part of Alaska, light winds across southwest and the west coast. And you can see more of a westerly bend to the winds coming off of eastern Asia, those being channeled up into the Arctic Ocean. It looks like more of an easterly flow south of that high pressure ridge influence, and those wind speeds pick up a little bit more south of the chain as high as 50 knots, and more of a southeasterly flow coming up the eastern Gulf. Pretty similar pattern at 3,000 feet, light winds across the interior, west and southwest, a little bit more of a wind across the Arctic coast between 20 and about 25 knots or so. Otherwise, winds from the east and northeast coming across the western Gulf, and more of an east and westerly flow across the North Pacific, with westerlies coming in, becoming southwesterly just west of the Bering Strait. So here's your turbulence potential. Not a whole lot to talk about there. Across the Bering Strait, probably running into some chop along the frontal boundary and right underneath that jet stream corridor, about 4,000 feet and below. And across the eastern part of the chain, and maybe as far west as Atka, below 4,000 feet, and then wrapping around the frontal boundary that's draped south and west of Haida Gwaii and southern parts of southeast. That's about it. High pressure's in charge. It's a beautiful day. There's not a lot of moisture to work with right now, so enjoy yourself Friday and head out of town on Saturday and Sunday. Enjoy the fine weather across most of the mainland, no matter what part of Alaska you are in or going to. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Astronomy Day and more.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. Mark Saturday, May 10th on your calendar as National Astronomy Day, a day when most astronomy clubs, planetariums, and science centers all across the country will be celebrating stargazing with all kinds of things astronomical, including looking through telescopes and usually free of charge.
Since 1973, National Astronomy Day has been observed in April or May on the Saturday closest to the first quarter moon, which will be on the 6th this year. Now, why do they do that? Well, first quarter moons are always high in the sky and easily visible in early evening, and they're much more interesting to observe through telescopes for Astronomy Day.
And they don't brighten the sky so much that other things like planets are washed out. So a Saturday close to a first quarter moon in May, when the weather is turning nice, just fits the bill.
So call your local planetarium, science center, or astronomy club to see what they're doing for Astronomy Day, and check our website, stargazersonline.org, for more info.
And as they have for many years, Astronomy Magazine and Celestron Telescopes are once again sponsoring Astronomy Day activities all across the country, with Celestron providing telescopes as door prizes, and a grand prize winner will be chosen from all across the country for a special telescope prize.
Now, just coincidentally, there are 3 planets available for viewing just after sunset, and the moon will help you find them. Let's show you.
Okay, we've got our skies set up for May 3rd, about an hour after sunset, facing west, where you'll see the bright planet Jupiter, which has been providing a spectacular sky show for the past few months.
Just above Jupiter, you'll find Castor and Pollux, the bright twin stars in Gemini, and below Jupiter, a waxing 5-day-old crescent moon. Then on Sunday the 4th, a slightly fatter crescent moon will be just to the left of Jupiter. Once again, the 3rd and the 4th.
If you keep on watching Jupiter each night over the next 2 months, you'll see something really unusual. Let's look at Jupiter and Castor and Pollux once more. They make a nice right triangle, don't they?
But over the next 2 months, Jupiter will rapidly move eastward in the sky each night. And by the end of June, as Jupiter is disappearing in the glow of evening twilight, Castor, Pollux, and Jupiter will be almost in a straight line. Once again, right triangle early in May, straight line at the end of June.
Let's get back to the moon and the other planets. If you watch every night next week, you'll see the moon move farther to the east each evening. And on Saturday, May 10th, Astronomy Day, a fairly pudgy 11-day-old moon will be about 6 degrees west of Mars. And the next night, May 11th, the moon will be east of Mars.
And if you don't have a telescope, most astronomy clubs, planetariums, and science centers will be showing you Jupiter and Mars and the moon through their telescopes on Astronomy Day.
Now, we said there were 3 planets that the moon would be showing you. Let's turn to the southeast after enjoying Mars, and the ring planet Saturn will be climbing higher in the sky. Saturn is brighter than it was at this time last year. In fact, it's brighter than it's been for the past 7 years. But why?
Let's start by remembering the big difference between the stars and planets. Stars produce their own light, lots of it, while we see planets only because they reflect the light of only one star, the sun. Planets like Saturn are really dinky when it comes to showing light in the sky, but since they're really close, some of the planets can appear to be really bright.
Now, Saturn's rings are a big part of the reflecting surface that sends light from the sun back our way to the Earth. The rings do not look the same all the time. In 2009, Saturn's rings were edge on to us and reflected very little, and for a short time, no light. But that was over 4 years ago. We'll be talking more about the changing brightness of Saturn in an upcoming episode of Stargazers. At any rate, enjoy all the free events and free telescopic viewing on National Astronomy Day.
It'll be a great outing for the whole family. Keep looking up.
Changes continue at a rapid pace across the central and northern Bering Sea, south of St. Lawrence Island. An awful lot of open water there shaping up across Norton Sound as well. And changes probably not too far from making their way north of the Bering Strait. So keep your eyes tuned to the Sea Ice Edge map. You can find this anytime you want by going to weather.gov/Anchorage and then look for the Ice Desk link on the left-hand side of your screen, and there you'll find the tools you need to make a map very similar to this. Of course, we're using Google Earth, but you can download the information like this and just drop it on any type of mapping system and chart the progress of the disappearing sea ice for 2014. Here's a look at the map across southeast. The wind speeds again probably not too bad as far as sustained winds go across the central inner waterways into Stevens Passage, for example. But the gusts are probably going to be considerably stronger, maybe as much by 30 knots on top of what you have here at 25 knots. So maybe 40 to 50, 55 knot gusts possible across the central inner waterways with a very tight pressure gradient across most of southeast. Across the Lynn Canal, northerlies at 30 knots with a 6-foot sea, 20-knot winds coming in from the southeast with a 4-foot sea. Offshore winds otherwise anywhere from 30 to 35 knots and 6 to 7-foot seas expected around coastal areas for Friday. By Saturday, winds diminish a little bit along the coast. 15-knot winds coming out of the north from Yakutat, 7-foot sea all the way down from Gustavus down toward Craig at 20 knots. And northerlies inside Lynn Canal. The winds are still blowing around 20 knots for the central and southern inner waterways with about a 4-foot sea expected. But again, watch out for those higher gust potential there around the Stevens Passage region and into the Clarence and Chatham Straits. Here's a look at South Central, and you'll notice wind speeds aren't very strong. High pressure is in control, and that's keeping the winds pretty flat. Seas are not too far off that as well. 2-foot seas inside and outside of Prince William Sound. They pick up to about 3 feet the further out you get. Variable flow outside of the Resurrection Bay region, 15-knot winds with a 3-foot sea, and more of a northwesterly flow crossing the Barren Islands, also at about 15 knots. Winds will be pretty light across the Shelikof Strait region with a westerly flow northeasterlies east of Kodiak Island and a light and variable flow in the northern parts of the Cook Inlet, becoming northerly once you get south of Kenai. On Saturday, you'll notice more of a northerly flow in the northern part of the Cook Inlet. Seas almost flat. A southwesterly flow in the Cook Inlet as you head down toward Homer. Otherwise, a variable flow west of the Barren Islands. That becomes westerly and offshore from Seward down toward the Barren Islands at about 15 knots. A variable flow inside and outside of Prince William Sound once again. 5-foot seas on the outside with 2-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait. More of a northeasterly flow there east of Kodiak Island once again. Northerlies as you head south from Kodiak all the way down toward Sand Point, about 15 knots with a 6 to 7-foot sea. Light easterly winds inside of Bristol Bay and northeasterly winds north of Cold Bay with a 3-foot sea on the Bering Sea side. By Saturday, very little change. We've got a westerly flow inside of Bristol Bay. Otherwise, northerlies on the Pacific side and northeasterly winds as you head down the coast toward Cold Bay out of Bristol Bay. So that's a look at Saturday along the Alaska Peninsula. We've got more of an east and southeasterly flow from Unalaska to Atka, 15 to 20 knots there on Friday. 4 to 8 foot seas, some of the higher seas just west of Nikolsky to Atka. An east to westerly flow south of Unalaska, Nikolsky, and Adak, anywhere from 20 to about 25 knots. Seas could be as high as 11 feet there. And the winds turn just a little bit more to the east and southeast as you head out from Kiska to Shemya. About 6 foot seas are expected there on Friday. The winds become variable as we get into Saturday with a 10-knot wind, a northeasterly flow over Kiska with an 8-foot sea, and north and northeasterly winds from Unalaska to Adak. The winds are a little bit stronger on the Pacific side, about 7 to 8 foot seas expected as we start up the weekend there. Now for the west coast, you can see that broad south and easterly flow wrapping around high pressure over the mainland. With that, pumping in a lot of warm air farther and farther north over the ice edge that is eroding quickly. Wind speeds up to 35 knots around St. Lawrence Island. For Nunivak Island, look at the 20-knot winds there from the south and east with a 6-foot sea. 9-foot seas, a little bit higher out there around the Pribilofs, and a southerly flow going strong across St. Matthew with 10-foot seas on Friday. On Saturday, look for the south and southeasterly flow to pick up anywhere from 20 to 30 knots, 25 knots over St. Paul and the Pribilofs, and 12-foot seas expected there with southerlies over St. Lawrence Island, 35 knots. Now across the Arctic coast, a south and southwesterly flow will run up the Chukchi Sea, more of a westerly flow across the Beaufort Sea coast at 15 knots. And as you get into Saturday, that reverses course, an east to westerly flow across the Beaufort Sea, and winds remain pretty light from the south coming up out of the Bering Strait, anywhere from 10 to about 15 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, it should be pretty quiet in most parts of Alaska with high pressure firmly in control. We've got a relatively clear sky across even the eastern interior. The Arctic slope looking at a few patchy areas of clouds, maybe some fog offshore, and a frontal boundary draped across the Bering Sea and into the North Pacific may gather up some showers in areas of fog, but most areas again should be pretty quiet and dry. Southeast, a little bit of a breeze for you is possible. Otherwise, a clear dry night and a clear dry day as we head into Friday. Look for the frontal boundary to stay well to the east. A dry weather day for most areas on Friday, and as we get into Saturday, a few showers develop along the Alaska Range. Have a good night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.